I want you to picture a scene. It's roughly 1919.
Okay, setting the stage.
Yeah, and we're in the back room of this massive industrial flour mill.
Oh, wow.
The air is just thick with white dust. It's loud. And there's a guy there, probably covered head to toe in this fine powder, and he is just obsessing over a chemical equation.
Right, and he's not just, a random line worker.
No, not at all.
He's a specialist. He is literally trying to figure out the exact tensile strength of dough.
He's engineering the perfect crust for a donut.
Exactly.
Right, and this is his life. He is a food engineer, a guy who spent his days genuinely worrying about the viscosity of pastry mixes, and I think earlier he was working on the bleaching standards of oysters.
Oysters, butter, yeah. Really glamorous stuff.
But here's the thing that I can't quite wrap my head around. When this man went home, washed the flour out of his hair and sat down at his desk.
He didn't write about baking.
No, he certainly didn't. He sat down and essentially invented the concept of the Galactic Empire.
It's so wild to think about.
He designed starships that were miles long. He casually destroyed entire planets. He created the absolute blueprint for interstellar warfare that we are, frankly, still using in fiction today.
It's the ultimate double life. I mean, we're talking, of course, about Edward Elmer Smith.
Yes.
Better known to history and to sci-fi fans everywhere as E.E. Doc Smith.
The man who specialized in donut mixes by day and blew up solar systems by night.
It sounds like a joke, but it's actually the key to understanding the entire genre of space opera. I mean, if you've ever watched Star Wars,
right?
If you've played Mass Effect, if you've read Dune or Foundation.
You are walking through a door that Doc Smith just kicked open while all his colleagues were asleep.
Exactly.
So, the mission for our deep dive today is pretty specific. We've got a ton of historical sources, letters, and literary analyses to pull from, but we aren't just doing a dry biography.
No, definitely not.
We're trying to figure out how a guy like this, a guy grounded in the most mundane, practical, literal science imaginable, managed to dream bigger than literally anyone else in his generation.
And we're going to look at the tangible impact of those dreams, because this isn't just about literary history, right? We're actually going to talk about how his wild fiction influenced the design of U.S. Navy warships in World War II.
Yes. That is the connection I am most excited to unpack today.
It's huge.
The idea that a pulp sci-fi novel helped win a war in the Pacific.
It's a bold claim, but the evidence in the sources is absolutely there. But before we get to the warships and the Galactic Patrols, we really have to understand the man himself. Because Doc Smith is, well, he's a bit of a paradox.
For sure. So let's rewind. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. Who was this guy before he became the father of space opera?
Well, he was a Midwestern boy, born in May of 1890 in Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
A very grounded place to start a galactic journey.
Very grounded. His parents were staunch Presbyterians. His father was actually a sailor who later transitioned to farming.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and they moved around a lot, from Wisconsin to Spokane, Washington, and eventually they settled in Idaho. And you have to remember, we're talking about the turn of the century in the American West here.
Right. This wasn't a life of leisure.
Not at all.
Looking at the notes we have here, he wasn't exactly born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was working heavy manual labor, right?
Very heavy manual labor. He was working with his hands, doing the kind of back-breaking physical work that builds a really specific kind of physical toughness.
Yeah.
But then when he was 19, he had what we might call a sliding doors moment.
A moment that kind of changed everything.
Yeah. There was a fire.
Oh, no.
And Smith was fleeing from it, and in the chaos of running away, he tripped or fell and severely injured his wrist.
Oh, wow. Which is a career-ending injury for a manual laborer back then.
Exactly. He physically couldn't do the heavy lifting anymore, so he had to pivot. And if that fire hadn't happened...
Or if he hadn't tripped.
Right. If he hadn't hurt his wrist, he might have spent his entire life as a farmer or a lumberjack in Idaho. We might never have had the Lensman series.
That is just wild to think about. A broken wrist gives us the Galactic Patrol.
Yep.
So because of the wrist, he pivots to academia.
He does. He goes to the University of Idaho, graduating in the class of 1914. And this is where we really start to see that Smith wasn't just a grinder. He was, well, energetic is an understatement.
Yeah, I was looking at his list of extracurriculars in college. It reads like he was trying to win some kind of main character of the universe contest.
It really does. I mean, he was, predictably, the president of the chemistry club.
Sure, makes sense.
But he was also president of the chess club.
Okay, smart guy stuff, check.
But then he was also the president of the guitar club.
The guitar club?
Yes. And the captain of the drill and rifle team.
So wait, he's a chemist who plays chess, plays guitar, and is a crack shot with a rifle.
And just to round it out completely, he sang the bass lead in the university's Gilbert and Sullivan operettas.
Okay, stop. That is just too much.
I know.
You have this rifle-toting, guitar-strumming, opera-singing chemist. You can kind of see the DNA of his future heroes right here, can't you?
Absolutely.
His characters are always these hyper-competent people who can just do everything.
Exactly. He was living that life. He valued competence above almost anything else. It wasn't enough to just be smart. You had to be capable. You had to be able to handle a rifle and a complex chemical equation at the same time.
So he finishes his undergrad, writing a thesis, by the way, called Some Clays of Idaho.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm sure was just an absolute page-turner.
Thrilling stuff.
And then he heads to George Washington University for his Ph.D.
Correct. He gets his Ph.D. in chemical engineering in 1918. This is where the Doc nickname actually comes from. He earned it.
He put in the work.
He really did. And his dissertation title is worth reading in full because it tells you exactly how his brain worked.
Lay it on me.
It was titled, "The Effect of Bleaching with Oxides of Nitrogen Upon the Baking Quality and Commercial Value of Wheat Flour."
That is, wow, that is incredibly specific.
It is, but think about what that means. He was studying how to use dangerous chemicals, oxides of nitrogen, to improve something as wholesome and everyday as bread.
Huh.
He was looking at the actual molecular structure of food to engineer a better, more commercially viable result.
So when he eventually starts writing about, space drives and energy weapons, he's approaching it with that exact same mindset.
Precisely. He wasn't a fantasy writer who just waved a magic wand to make a ship go fast. He was an engineer. Even when he was completely making things up, he was trying to engineer them to make sense.
He wanted to know the baking quality of the universe, so to speak.
That's a great way to put it.
It grounds the wilder ideas, I think. If you know the guy writing about a faster-than-light inertialess drive also knows exactly how nitrogen affects flour down to the molecule, you just trust him a bit more as a reader.
Exactly. You buy into his reality. And we can't skip over his personal life here because it actually becomes the template for his fiction.
Right.
In 1915, he married Jean Craig McDougall.
The classic roommate-sister romance, if I recall.
It was. She was the sister of his college roommate. She was Scottish, and the sources describe her as remarkably beautiful and highly intelligent. And for Smith, she became the absolute archetype.
The mold for his characters.
Yes. If you look at the Lensman series, the ultimate heroine in that universe, Clarissa McDougall, is explicitly based on Jean, even sharing the maiden name.
So he was basically writing a love letter to his wife into the history of the galaxy.
In a way, yeah. They had 3 kids, Roderick, Verna, and Clarissa. It was a very stable, traditional family unit. And I really think that stability is what allowed him to have such a wild imagination.
That makes sense.
He had a solid anchor at home so his mind could safely wander to the edge of the cosmos.
Let's talk about the day job again. Because we mentioned the donuts at the very beginning, but that wasn't the only thing he did.
No, not at all. He started out as a junior chemist at the Bureau of Standards in D.C., working on those butter and oyster standards we joked about. Then he actually worked for the Commission for Relief in Belgium during World War I. And here is a detail from the sources that I think is absolutely crucial. Smith desperately wanted to go to war.
Wanted to fight.
He wanted to fly. He tried to enlist as a pilot. He wanted to get into one of those canvas and wood Jenny biplanes and dogfight over Europe.
Wow. But they wouldn't let him.
No, chemists were way too valuable to the war effort. Or, as he later joked about it, the planes were too expensive for the military to trust him with one.
That's funny.
But that frustration, that deep desire to be up in the air, controlling a powerful machine, dogfighting that never left him.
You can see that channeling directly into his writing. If the Army wouldn't let him fly a biplane over France, he was going to fly a miles-long dreadnought over the Galactic Core.
Exactly. It's pure wish fulfillment. So after the war, he goes into the private sector. He becomes the chief chemist for F.W. Stock & Sons, and later the production manager at the Doughnut Company. That was around 1936.
And this wasn't some cushy desk job where he just signed papers and went golfing.
Far from it. The records show he was working 18-hour days, 7 days a week.
That is brutal.
He was physically in the factory, developing new mixes, troubleshooting the production lines. This was grueling, high-pressure industrial work.
It's just incredible to visualize. He's standing there, smelling frying dough, completely exhausted, probably covered in flour, like we said. And meanwhile, in the back of his head, he's plotting the trajectory of a starship.
Yeah.
How did he actually make that leap? Like, how does a tired donut engineer actually sit down and start writing the Skylark of space?
It all traces back to one specific night in 1915. The Smiths were living in Washington, D.C., and they were visiting an old classmate of his, Dr. Carl Garby, and his wife, Lee.
Ah, the Big Bang of space opera.
It really was. They were sitting around after dinner, and the conversation just naturally turned to space travel. Just pure speculation. Could we ever go to the stars? What would we find out there?
And amidst this excitement, someone told Smith, "You have these incredible ideas, you should write them down."
Right. But Smith hesitated. He didn't really think of himself as a writer.
Why not? He clearly had the imagination.
He had a very specific insecurity. He said he could handle the science, the action, the exploration, no problem. But he felt a novel needed romantic elements.
Human drama.
Exactly. It needed human drama. And he, the rigorous, serious scientist, felt super uncomfortable writing about love and emotions and, flirting.
Which is funny, considering he was happily married to a woman he clearly adored.
True. But experiencing love and writing it for an audience are two very different things. So they came up with a solution.
A collaboration.
Yes. Lee Garby, his friend's wife, offered to write the love interest parts and the dialogue.
That's amazing.
And Smith would handle the physics, the battles, and the aliens.
It's like a split-brain novel. One hemisphere is doing feelings and dialogue. The other hemisphere is doing orbital mechanics and explosions.
And it worked. The main characters in the Skylark of space are basically just them. The heroes, the Setons, were clearly modeled on the Smiths. The wealthy, cultured friends who come along, the Cranes, were the Garbys.
They just wrote themselves into their own space adventure.
They really did.
So they finished the book around 1920. Do they just pop champagne and become instant bestsellers?
Absolutely not. They hit a massive wall. You have to remember, in 1920, science fiction wasn't really a category on the bookshelf.
It was barely a concept.
Right. Publishers were completely baffled by it. Smith sent the manuscript out again and again. He actually later calculated that he spent more money on postage stamps sending the manuscript to publishers than he eventually received as his first paycheck for it.
Oh, man, that is depressing.
It is. But the rejection letters are fascinating historical documents. There was one from Bob Davis, who was the editor of Argosy magazine.
And Argosy was a big deal back then.
Huge deal. Davis actually liked the story. He wrote that he thought it was exciting, but he still rejected it.
Why?
He said it was, quote, too far out.
Too far out.
He genuinely thought the readers in 1922 just wouldn't be able to suspend their disbelief. A story about traveling to other stars, it was too wild. It was too imaginative for the market.
I mean, in hindsight, that is a badge of honor. Your book is literally too creative for our audience to comprehend.
Seriously.
So what finally changed? How did it get published?
The world finally caught up to Doc Smith. Specifically, a magazine called Amazing Stories launched. This was the first magazine ever dedicated solely to what they called science fiction.
Okay.
And in 1928, the editor, T. O'Connor Sloan, finally bought Skylark.
And what was that massive paycheck?
A whopping $75.
Ouch.
Which was eventually raised to $125.
Still not exactly quit your donut job money?
No, definitely not. But the reaction from the readers was explosive. It ran as a serial in the magazine, and people completely lost their minds. They had never seen scale like this before.
Because before Smith, if you had a space story, it was usually, what, a dream sequence?
Yeah.
Or maybe a trip to the moon or Mars?
Exactly. Wells or Verne. Very localized. Smith gave them the entire galaxy. He gave them infinite speeds. He gave them godlike power and weapons that could crack planets.
It was the very first time readers actually felt the true size of the universe in fiction.
It was. But here's the kicker. Smith himself later looked back on Skylark and was actually pretty critical of it.
Really? Why? It launched his career.
He made a strict distinction between scientific fiction and pseudoscience. He felt that in Skylark, he had cheated way too much. He played too fast and loose with the rules of physics.
Ah, the engineer's guilt.
Exactly. He considered Skylark to be pseudoscience. He wanted to do something tighter, something that felt more real, more like a police procedural set in space.
And that desire for structure is what leads us to his absolute masterpiece,
Yeah.
the Lensman series.
Yes. This is where Smith stops just writing fun stories and starts building a cohesive universe. By 1927, he was already thinking about a space police novel.
Which is such a staple trope for us now. I mean, you've got the Green Lantern Corps, you've got the Jedi Order, the Spectres in Mass Effect. But back then, Cops in Space was a totally fresh idea.
Completely fresh, and he approached it like a literal research project. He read other sci-fi stories specifically to analyze cops and robbers' tropes.
He was studying the genre.
He cited writers like Startle and Williamson as positive examples. He wanted to know what worked and what didn't mechanically in a story. And when he finally sat down to plan the Lensman series, he didn't just scribble some notes on a napkin.
I read about this. The outline was massive, wasn't it?
It was an engineering document. She wrote an 85-page outline for the core novels before he wrote a single line of the actual text.
85 pages. That's not an outline. That's a whole novella.
And he didn't just write text in this outline. He created graphs.
Graphs, like literally an X and Y axis.
Literally graphs. He graphed the peaks of emotional intensity.
Hey, you're kidding.
No, he wanted to visually map out the reader's heart rate over the course of the book. He also graphed what he called valleys of characterization, creating a visual representation of when the action needed to slow down so that characters could breathe and develop.
That is the most chemical engineer thing I have ever heard in my life. It's like, if I add 15% more emotional intensity here, the reaction will be stable.
It really is. But he was also self-aware enough as a writer to know that plans change. He actually noted in his letters that his characters would often get away from him and, quote, do exactly as they damn please.
Which is the mark of a good writer, honestly. If the characters feel real enough in your head to disobey your 85-page outline, you're doing something right.
Definitely. But to keep the universe consistent, because he hated loose ends, he did something very clever. He actually wrote the very end of the entire series, the conclusion of the final book, Children of the Lens, immediately after finishing the rough draft of the first book, Galactic Patrol.
Wow. He built the exit before he even built the maze.
He had to. He wanted to make absolute sure that every single plot thread, every alien race he introduced in Book 1 would tie up perfectly in Book 6. It was a massive architectural feat.
And clearly the readers responded to that level of detail.
They devoured it. When Gray Lensman was published in 1939 in Astounding Stories, the reader polls showed it was the best story, quote, by a light year. He was the undisputed king of the genre at that point.
But he did have some friction with the editors, specifically John W. Campbell, right?
Right. Campbell is a massive titan in sci-fi history. He was the editor of Astounding. Now, Campbell respected Smith's popularity. He knew Smith sold magazines like crazy. But they had fundamentally different philosophies on what sci-fi should be.
How so?
Campbell wanted psychological stories. He wanted nuance, moral ambiguity, characters wrestling with internal demons. Smith dealt in absolutes. Good versus evil, black versus white, civilization versus chaos.
So by the 1950s?
By the 50s, Campbell started to view Smith's style as a bit of a dinosaur, a relic of the pulp era. He bought very little from him later on.
It's the classic old guard versus the new wave.
Exactly. But even if Campbell thought the literary style was old-fashioned, he could never deny that Smith's technological ideas were revolutionary.
And this brings us to what I think is the most important part of our discussion today. The science and the real-world impact.
Yes, because we teased this in the intro, the connection between Doc Smith's fiction and the U.S. Navy.
This is a story that still completely blows my mind. Walk us through it.
Okay, so in the Lensman series, Smith describes a specific room aboard a command ship called the Directrix.
What exactly is the Directrix?
Imagine a massive, darkened room. It's referred to as a tank. Inside this room, fleet commanders can see a real-time, three-dimensional visualization of the entire battle space.
Okay.
They aren't looking out a glass window at the stars. They are looking at screens, lighted displays showing the position of every single ship, friend and foe, in the fleet. They can communicate instantly with any unit. It is a central nerve center for gathering and processing tactical information.
Right. Now, to a modern listener, that just sounds like a normal war room. Or, honestly, a video game mini-map.
Exactly. We take it for granted.
Yeah.
But you have to contextualize this. In the 1930s, when he was conceiving this, naval battles were incredibly chaotic.
Right. How did they work back then?
The captain was usually standing on the bridge, physically looking out, shouting orders. Information came in haphazardly via signal flags, flashing lights, or crackly radio, but it was fragmented. There was no single, dedicated place deep inside the ship where all the radar, sonar, and visual information was integrated into one cohesive picture.
So Doc Smith basically invented the concept of an integrated information center.
He did, and the U.S. Navy was apparently paying attention. Fast forward to 1947, John W. Campbell, the editor we just talked about, writes a letter to Smith.
Okay.
And in this letter, Campbell relays a message he received from a U.S. Navy officer named Captain Cal Lanning.
And what did Captain Lanning say?
Lanning confirmed that he had read Smith's books, and he acknowledged openly that the design of the U.S. Navy's combat information centers, the CICs that they developed during World War II, was, and I quote, taken specifically, directly, and consciously from the directrix.
Wait, pause. I just want to make sure I and everyone listening fully understand this. You were telling me that during World War II, while fighting this massive, desperate naval war against the Japanese in the Pacific, the United States Navy reorganized its entire command structure based on a pulp sci-fi novel written by a donut chemist.
That is exactly what happened. Campbell told Smith in that letter, "You, sir, were 100% right, as the Japanese Navy learned at an appalling cost."
That is insane.
The Japanese had excellent ships, they had brave sailors, but they lacked that central nervous system on their vessels. The U.S. Navy adopted Smith's directrix concept, creating the CIC, and it gave them a decisive, overwhelming tactical advantage.
That is absolutely wild. I mean, it's one thing for a sci-fi writer to predict a gadget, right? Like a flip phone or an iPad. It's another thing entirely to fundamentally redesign the architecture of modern warfare.
It really shows that Smith understood the core problem of command. He understood that as battles got bigger, faster, and involved more units, the human brain simply couldn't keep up without a dedicated interface to process the data. So he designed the interface.
And the military actually built it.
Yep.
And he didn't stop there either. He was making predictions all over the place in his books.
Oh, yes. The man was a prophet of technology. In Skylark, which he wrote right after World War I, he describes energy processes that look suspiciously like cold fusion.
Wow.
He talks about releasing the energy of the atom with negligible waste decades before the atomic bomb or nuclear reactors were a reality.
And he was way into IT before IT even existed as a field.
Oh, heavily. He invented something called the mechanical educator, which is basically direct brainwave learning. Think of the Matrix, right? I know Kung Fu.
Yeah, uploading knowledge directly.
Smith wrote about that in the 1930s. He also wrote about the electronic brain, which was a machine that could compute using all energy bands, tachyonic, gravity, electromagnetic. He was basically envisioning supercomputing and quantum computing long before the transistor was even invented.
He also tackled military concepts like stealth, AWACS, the ODA loop.
Oh.
And I love this one. He highlighted the difficulty of maintaining technological secrecy.
Right, the idea that once a weapon is used on the battlefield, the enemy will inevitably reverse engineer and duplicate it.
Which is exactly how the arms race works.
Exactly. But as much as he got right, we have to talk about the one major thing he got wrong. Or rather, the thing he intentionally broke for the sake of the story.
The inertialist drive.
The Bergeron drive. This is a brilliant example of Smith the engineer battling Smith the storyteller.
Explain the physics problem he was trying to solve here.
The problem is Albert Einstein. Special relativity dictates that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. And worse, as an object with mass accelerates and gets closer to the speed of light, its mass effectively becomes infinite.
So if you try to punch it to light speed, your ship becomes infinitely heavy, which means it requires infinite energy to push it.
Exactly. It's a cosmic speed limit. You cannot break it. But Smith wanted a galactic empire. You can't have a galactic empire if it takes 100,000 years just to send a radio message across the galaxy, let alone a fleet. He needed a way for his ships to travel impossibly fast.
So did he just wave his hands and ignore Einstein?
No, he respected Einstein way too much for that.
Yeah.
Instead, he looked for a loophole. He postulated a fictional device that could completely negate inertia.
Okay.
If a ship has zero inertia, no mass resistance to acceleration, then the relativistic rule about infinite mass doesn't apply to it. You can accelerate instantly to any speed you want, millions of times the speed of light, using barely any thrust.
It's a cheat code.
It is a total cheat code. But he tried so hard to justify it. He actually cited Bigelow's theoretical chemistry in the text of the novel to give the drive a veneer of academic plausibility. He knew it was impossible by the physics of his day, but he called it his one big lie.
The one big lie rule. I've heard writers talk about this. You get one major impossibility, and then everything else that follows has to be completely logical.
Exactly. Once you ask the reader to accept that the inertialess drive works, everything else, how the ships navigate, how they fight, what happens if the drive fails mid-flight, is treated with rigorous, unbending logic.
Like what? What's an example?
Well, for example, if you are moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour without inertia, and you suddenly turn off the drive,
You instantly stop.
no, your intrinsic inertia returns instantly. You would revert exactly to your original velocity relative to your surroundings before you turn the drive on.
Oh, that's weird.
Right. And because you have zero inertia while moving under the drive, you don't splat against the wall of the ship when you turn it off and suddenly stop.
Because there's no momentum to carry you forward into the bulkhead.
Precisely. It creates a very unique, logically consistent tactical environment for his space battles.
It's fascinating that he put that much thought into the actual mechanics of his own cheat.
It's what makes him the father of space opera. He wasn't just writing an adventure story, he was writing complex systems.
Let's talk about that title, The Father of Space Opera. The sources list him as one of the three novas of 20th century sci-fi.
Yes, along with Stanley G. Weinbaum and, of course, Robert A. Heinlein.
And his relationship with Heinlein is something I really want to dig into, because Heinlein is an absolute giant in the field. But he looked up to Smith.
He revered him. They were actually very close friends in real life. Heinlein dedicated his book Methuselah's Children to Smith. And Heinlein famously admitted that he learned more about writing from Doc Smith than from all other writers put together.
Wow. And there is a story in the sources about them buying a car together that I absolutely love. It paints such a vivid, hilarious picture of their friendship.
Oh, the Superman car test. It is legendary. So Heinlein is looking to buy a used car. He asks Smith, the brilliant engineer, to come along and help him inspect it to make sure it's a good deal.
Two absolute geniuses kicking the tires on a used Chevy.
Right. So Smith gets in the driver's seat. He takes the car out to a quiet country back road, and he starts driving fast.
Okay.
Like highly illegal speeds. He is just tearing down this dirt road.
Testing the engine output.
Testing the chassis. But here's the visual you have to picture. While Smith is driving like an absolute maniac, both he and Heinlein have their heads pressed firmly up against the roof of the car.
Why? Why would they do that?
Bone conduction.
You're kidding.
Nope. Smith claimed that by pressing their skulls directly against the metal frame of the roof, they could hear subtle vibrations and squeaks in the chassis that the human ear alone would miss over the sound of the engine.
That is the most absurd, wonderful image. Two of the greatest minds in the history of science fiction speeding down a dirt road, heads just mashed against the ceiling, listening for squeaks.
It sums them up perfectly, doesn't it? They weren't just dreamers. They were mechanics at heart. They wanted to know exactly how the machine worked. Whether it was a used car or a fictional galactic government, they wanted to look under the hood.
And that influence, the mechanical world building, it ripples out to people who maybe never even read Smith directly. I mean, we have talked about Star Wars.
You cannot have Star Wars without Lensman, period. George Lucas has cited the Lensman series as a major influence on his youth. Smith is the unacknowledged progenitor of so much of that universe.
Give us the specifics. What's the DNA match here?
Okay, look at the lens itself. In the books, it is a device given only to a select group of incorruptible, highly trained officers, the Lensmen.
Right.
It gives them telepathic powers, it acts as a universal translator, and it identifies them universally as the elite guardians of civilization.
I mean, that sounds a whole lot like a lightsaber and the Force wrapped into one.
It is the Jedi Order. The
Right.
Galactic Patrol is the direct model for the Jedi. And then you have the broader background conflict. In Lensman, there are two ancient, super powerful races. The Arisians, who are good, and the Adorians, who are evil.
Okay.
And these ancient races are secretly manipulating all the younger races, humans, aliens, guiding them toward a massive final confrontation.
Which sounds exactly like the light and dark sides of the Force.
Or even the Vorlons and the Shadows in Babylon 5.
Exactly. J. Michael Straczynski, the creator of Babylon 5, openly acknowledged his debt to Smith. That specific trope, the idea of elder races guiding the younger races, is pure Doc Smith. And Jerry Siegel, the creator of Superman, was hugely impressed by the optimistic future Smith laid out in Skylark.
It's everywhere. And we even see it in early video games, right? Space War.
Yes, Space War, the great-grandfather of all computer games. It was developed at MIT in the early 60s. Steve Slug Russell, the primary programmer, said explicitly that he was trying to recreate the space battles from the Lensman series on a computer screen.
So when he was coding the physics of the ships, he was trying to code Doc Smith's physics. The way the ships drifted, the way they fired torpedoes, the tactical maneuvering. So honestly, if you're playing Halo or EVE Online today, there is a direct line of code, metaphorically speaking, leading all the way back to Doc Smith's Doughnut factory.
The multi-billion-dollar gaming industry owes a debt to the Doughnut guy. I absolutely love it.
It's incredible. And we should probably touch on his later life because he actually lived to see the world change in ways he predicted. He finally retired from the Doughnut business in 1957.
The end of an era. No more 18-hour shifts.
Right. He retired to Florida and later moved to Oregon. By this time, he was a massive celebrity in the sci-fi world. He was the guest of honor at conventions, and he genuinely loved the fans. There's a great photo of him at She-Con-I in 1940, actually masquerading as Northwest Smith, a character created by another writer, C.L. Moore.
Oh, that's cool. He wasn't a snob about it. He was a fan himself.
He was a huge fan of the genre he helped build.
But ironically, for a guy who literally invented the concept of the inertialess drive to travel the stars, I read he didn't like flying.
No. It's so funny. The man who desperately wanted to be a World War I fighter pilot eventually developed a strong dislike for commercial airplanes. He insisted on driving everywhere.
Probably with his head pressed against the roof of the car the whole way.
Probably. Listening for squeaks all the way from Florida to Oregon.
I do want to take a second to clear up one specific point of confusion that always comes up with Smith. There are some books on the shelves credited to E.E. Doc Smith called Lord Tedrick.
Ah, yes.
And people often point to those books and say, look, he invented the Death Star.
Right. This is a very common misconception in the fandom. Let's clear it up. Smith wrote a short story called Tedrick. It was about a blacksmith. It was a very small-scale contained story. Decades later, a writer named Gordon Eklund was hired to expand that single short story into a full series of novels.
So Eklund wrote the books, but they slapped Smith's name on the cover to sell copies.
Effectively, yes. And in those later books written by Eklund, there is a weapon called the Iron Sphere that destroys planets. It looks and acts exactly like the Death Star from Star Wars. But that was entirely Eklund's invention, not Smith's original idea.
Okay, so we can't give Smith credit for the Death Star specifically.
No. But to be fair, in his actual books, he did invent something called the Sunbeam, which could literally turn a sun into a directed weapon. So he really wasn't far off in terms of destructive scale.
Planet killer, sun killer, close enough. He worked right up until the very end, didn't he?
He did. He died on August 31st, 1965, and in a really poetic twist, the final Skylark novel, Skylark Duquesne, was published that exact same year.
Wow. So he started the series in 1915 with Lee Garvey and finished it in 1965.
A 50-year span. Just think about the technological progress in that specific window. When he started writing Skylark, people were still driving horse-drawn buggies in the streets. When he finished it, the Gemini space program was flying, and we were only 4 years away from literally walking on the moon.
He didn't just watch the future happen. He wrote the brochure for it.
He really did.
So, as we bring this deep dive in for a landing today, we've gone from the dusty flour mill in 1919 to the center of the galaxy. We've seen how a working-class chemist used his rigorous engineering brain to build an entire universe. What is the big takeaway here for you?
For me, looking at all these sources, it's about the sheer power of competence and optimism. Smith's world is a world where science actually works, where human reason and engineering work.
Yeah.
His heroes aren't angsty or conflicted about whether they should save the day. They see a massive problem, they engineer a logical solution, and they execute it perfectly.
It's an incredibly optimistic view of humanity. It basically says that if we are smart enough and if we work hard enough, we can solve literally anything, even interstellar war.
Exactly. And the fact that the U.S. Navy actually used his ideas to build the CIC proves that he wasn't just daydreaming. He was engaged in high-level problem-solving through the medium of fiction.
That loop from imagination to reality is what really sticks with me. He imagined the directrix, the Navy built the CIC base on it, and now modern sci-fi writers grow up in a world completely defined by that technology, which they then put into their own books.
It's a perfect circle of influence. It makes you wonder what fiction being written today is secretly going to be the blueprint for the next century of human advancement.
That is the question. Doc Smith was working exhausting 18-hour days in a donut factory, and in the tiny slivers of time he had left over, he changed the world.
He undeniably did.
So here's my final provocative thought for you to chew on today. If a donut engineer in 1920 could dream up the template for modern naval warfare in the multi-billion-dollar video game industry in his spare time, what visionary, world-changing ideas are currently hiding in the notebooks of the person sitting in the cubicle next to you right now?
Or perhaps what ideas are hiding in your own notebooks.
Exactly. Don't throw those ideas away just because they seem too far out. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the massive universe of Doc Smith. Keep looking up.
And keep reading.